turn it over to Dan Nielson. I appreciate you joining us again. He was here last fall, did a fantastic job, so we had him back.
Thanks. Anybody here see me last time? So am I repeating myself? Hey, I've taken these master's classes. They can be tough, let me tell you. Well, welcome. As you can see, all the notes I have laid out in front of me, that's how we're going to do it tonight. And that's kind of what I did last time, and it worked pretty well, so I wanted to try to do some of the same sort of thing this time. Now, you guys are a master's level business class, correct? Okay. Most of you probably actually work for a living, right? And you kind of do this and you're half asleep, right? I can appreciate that. I just got them, well, I still haven't finished putting in my day. As your teacher can attest, I was just handling a phone call out there in the hallway where we actually got involved in the shooting this afternoon, or this morning up in Maryville. So we're still trying to get all that stuff handled. And thankfully it wasn't us, it was them. So these things do happen. I had to laugh when he's talking about the FBI. We've got all the people here. I just got to tell you, one of the things I do sometimes, I go talk to the undergraduate classes. I did it last time I went up to Ball State. It was kind of fun. I had my handcuffs with me that night. And we decided that what we were going to do is, you have stragglers that come into the class. Well, the first straggler that came into the class, I got to handcuff him. Well, then the next one, he got to handcuff the next straggler. So I got to remember to do that. So it works pretty well. It's kind of fun. Okay, a little bit about myself, and then I think we're going to talk about security in the business world, and then what I would really like to do is I'd like to find out what's on your mind. My best guess is that you probably don't have a lot of access to FBI agents. Am I wrong? Now you do. Unless you've got a question that ends up being in classified information that I can't talk about, I don't care what you ask a question on. I'm here, I'm yours for whatever the time may be. I don't care if we talk about business, I don't care if we talk about kiddie porn, I don't care what the hell we talk about. I'm yours for the time being, okay? Let me tell you a little bit about me. You know where my background is, you know where I come from, and then we'll go from there. And I may end up dumping this coat before long, so I hope nobody gets offended about the gun. That's just the way it goes. Okay, name, Dan Nielson. My history. Started out after high school as a military policeman because I wanted to be a cop. Hey, we all want to be cops. We're kids. Cops are firemen, right? Well, guys do. So did I. That's what I did. Spent my time in the service, got out of the service, ended up going and went to college, went to University of Washington. Actually got my degree from Central Washington University in accounting. Why accounting? First classes had opened up. Kind of worked out that way. I like the numbers. It was physics or accounting. I got into the accounting class before I got into the physics class. That's just kind of the way life works sometimes. As I got towards the end of my program, and it took me 8 years. I mean, I worked full-time like a lot of you guys have. I started to ask the question, now what do I want to do with this? And along came the idea of the FBI. I said, you know what? That might make a good blend. I've got all this practical experience in law enforcement. I was with the Seattle Police Department for 7 years when I was going to school. And yet I had the accounting degree, and I thought that would make a good blend. Because the FBI does historically look for accountants or attorneys. They look for others as well, too. In fact, we've now branched out. Computer science is a big thing. Some of the languages, particularly, can you guess? Middle Eastern languages. Anybody here speaks Farsi, please see me after class. So those are the kinds of things that the Bureau was looking for at the time. And for me, it made sense at the time. I hate this thing sitting up here. Keep looking over the top of it. And I love taking over a classroom. You should see what I do to your house when I walk into it. You got to have a sense of humor in this job. You don't, you can make people's lives miserable. That's part of the fun, too. Okay, so that's what I ended up doing. Law enforcement with the local police department, did that for several years, whether the military or the local PD. The accounting background, came into the Bureau. Lo and behold, here I am. I've been to Las Vegas office, I've been to Los Angeles office, I've been to our headquarters in Washington, and now I've been here. I've been here about, it'll be 4 years in September. Most notorious case, if I'm famous for anything, it's the Rodney King case. I was one of the 3 agents that handled the Rodney King matter. It was hell, let me tell you, it was not fun being one of those agents, particularly having been a former cop. Not fun at all, but I raised my hand and said I'm going to do what I got to do, did what I had to do. After that, a lot of my background ended up becoming in the computer realm. At that point in time, I came into the Bureau in '86. Internet was just getting started around the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. It was something of interest to me. It was just simply a hobby. The Bureau was not strong into the computers at that point in time, not nearly like they are now. I got my introduction into computers in the computer forensics component. In other words, what I do is I take the computers that you have sitting around here and I try to figure out what are all the dirty little secrets that you have hidden there. It's wonderful. Give you an example of the kinds of things that we had. When I was in Los Angeles and doing computer forensics, we had a case. The Air Force came to us and they said, you know what? We have this guy who is working as a contractor for us, and he's supposed to be doing all this great work, but we just don't see anything coming out. We see no product. We're wondering what it is that he's doing. Well, they asked themselves that question. So what they decided to do is they set up a camera over his workplace and decided to videotape him, seeing what it was that he was doing. Well, lo and behold, what he was not doing was contractual work. What he was doing was using that huge pipe that the Air Force had into the internet to download kiddie porn. And he downloaded it hand over fist, and that's when they came to us. Well, when they came to us, we put the case together, and typically what we will do, like if we go out on a search, we don't usually arrest you then. We let you stew in your juices for a while. We'll collect the information, we'll come back, we'll put all the information together, and then we'll indict you later. That's what happened in this case. We went out, we did the search warrant, we searched his place, pulled his computer, and it was going to be my job to actually look at the computer the next day. First thing in the morning, we get a call. We got a problem. What's the problem? He's dead. He's what? You don't like it when your subjects die. It's not good. Not good. I've had that happen twice now. The question is, why does he die? What it is that he killed himself. After we left his house, however many hours later, he kills himself. Why? Well, I've gone through and I have looked at a lot of computers. And I have seen a lot of kiddie porn. There's very little out there that I haven't seen. A lot of the stuff is recycled time and time again. But I got to tell you, this guy had more stuff than anybody I had ever seen. But not only was it the quantity, it was the mindset behind it. We always have to try to prove what they call the mens rea. What's the mental state of the person who is committing a crime? Well, one of the things that I would have been able to do, had this guy not, croaked himself, was to go in and look at his computer. When you download stuff, what do? How do you have your directory structure? Usually it's pretty straight. You go to, like, say, your program files, all your programs under there. Some people use, like, the My Documents. Well, what this guy did, he had a separate drive, and it was his download, whatever. Who knows what the name it was. But his directory structure was such that he had boys, he had girls, he had prepubescent, postpubescent, teens, front, rear, coital, you name it. He had all kinds of categories broken down just in his directory structure. And then you go into each of those subdirectories, and there's all the pictures that are there. Now you go and pull up like an Excel spreadsheet. I forget if it was that or if he had access. Now he's got the database or the spreadsheet that has it all cataloged. This guy was in the business. He didn't do it just for his jollies. He was in the business of this. I forgot to tell you, too, I think that he was the coach of the boys' basketball team over at the junior high. Anybody have a question why he killed himself? It becomes pretty obvious. But that's the kind of thing that we will see, and that's the kind of thing that got me into the computer realm in the FBI. After Los Angeles, I went back to our FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. And at the end of the time when I was in LA, I started to get involved in some of the internet investigations. I was involved in some of the first ones that we had. None of the Bureau people were trained in it at that point in time. We were all self-taught, and I was one of those self-taught people. I do not have a computer science degree. Well, I got called back to headquarters because some people knew about some of the work that I had done in computers. And what we worked on is we set up what's now called the National Infrastructure Protection Center. Anybody hear of that before? There's a couple that might if you're involved in computer security. I was there before we call it NIPSI. That's the acronym. It used to be CTAC when I was there. And I was there when we created the NIPSI component. What NIPSI is set up to do is not handle the forensics, but to actually handle the investigations, not in the kiddie porn stuff, but actually in the hacking stuff, in the computer intrusions. So that's where I was. I was there for the first couple of cases that we have. If I have another claim to fame, anybody here know the Solar Sunrise case? Have you been to any of my speeches before? You look familiar. Yes? Speak into the microphone, please.
I was a intelligence officer, and I did supported computer network defense.
Okay. So you're aware of that one. Well, my claim to fame was I made up the name for Solar Sunrise. How did we get that? Because it was a Solaris operating system, and this is one of the first cases that we had. So Solaris, what's the first thing that comes up? Sunrise. That was my brain fart one night sitting there, laying there in bed. So I was there for that one. What that particular case was not an atypical kind of case, but it kind of gives you an idea of how these kinds of cases work. So let me tell you a little bit about that case. In this case, as in all cases, time and place mean a lot. This case arose at the time when there was a lot of buildup in the Middle East, much like is going on right now. What was happening is that someone was breaking into some military servers. They were domain name servers, and they were running a Solaris operating system. I forget which version. There was a certain exploit that was known. It had been published on the internet for quite some time, and somebody was exploiting them. They were breaking into the domain name servers. And if you're not familiar with the domain name server, they're a very important computer on the internet. Effectively, what they do is they're kind of like the universal translator, you know, in Star Trek. What happens is that we understand www.iupui.edu. As humans, that makes sense to us. What doesn't make sense to us is 12.24.105.16.8. Huh? Try to remember that one. I couldn't repeat it myself. But that's what the computer is really named. It's an IP address, an Internet Protocol address. Well, what that domain name server does is it changes it looks up and says, oh, let's see, I know that iupui.edu is actually 12.86. Whatever number I rattled off. That's what a domain name server is. It translates it. It acts as a routing computer, basically, is what it does then. So it now knows to send your message to IUPUI. You can see where these kinds of computers can become very important to the system in general, not to mention just the military. Well, one of the things that we were noticing is that some of the traffic appeared to be coming in from some Middle East computer servers. Now, wait a second. We've got a buildup in the Middle East going on in the military. Somebody is coming in and they're attacking some very critical computers that are out there that are servicing the military. Is this information warfare? We don't know. But let me tell you, it got the Pentagon spun right up into the ceiling. And let me tell you something else. It is not fun at all trying to unscrew them out of the ceiling. Can you attest to this? That is true. It's nicely subtly said. I do not like having to go over to the Pentagon on a regular basis and try to explain to generals why I don't have answers yet. It is not a fun place to be. Nonetheless, that's what we had to do. Ultimately, what we were able to do, we were able to set up some traps out there that were on the internet, and we were able to find out what was really going on. What it really turned out to be was there was a couple kids out in California. They called themselves Ren and Stimpy. There's a handle out there. High school kids. And they kind of got a kick out of doing this, breaking into this stuff. In the hacking community, it's kind of like, you know, hanging the skins up. You know, hey, look, this is one that I got. That's kind of what they did. But the real beauty of the hacking community is the way that they share information. And that is how we actually caught them. What they would do is that they would break into a computer, and they'd get as far as they could get and say, I'm not sure what the next thing is to do. They would jump on one of the bulletin boards, on one of the chat rooms, whatever it was, and they would reach out to look for some help. Well, a guy ends up helping him. It turns out to be a guy who tutors them, essentially, and he's actually in Israel. That's where this guy was coming from, and that's where this Middle Eastern connection came up from. And we did not know that at the time. We were ultimately able to track this down. So that's what happened. We were able to capture their chat going back and forth as this guy in Israel would mentor these kids out there in California. So after a little bit more investigation, that's what we were able to figure out. We went out, and ultimately the other thing that we have to do in these cases, it's not good enough to know just the computer that this attack is coming from, because I can't arrest in a computer. They don't go to jail very well. People, flesh and blood, go to jail. That's the real difficult part for us in a lot of these cases, is who is actually sitting behind this keyboard executing these commands. So that becomes essential for us. How do we do that? Maybe you go up and just knock on the door. Maybe sometimes maybe you'll set up some kind of a wiretap on their computer. Who knows? There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Try to figure out who lives there. Is it only one person? In this case, now you've got a kid who's living there with his parents, maybe a brother or sister. Which one is it? Sometimes you have to intercept the traffic, understand what some of the things that are being said are, so you understand some of the mindsets, some of the phraseology that they might use. And now that helps us to identify which is the individual that is doing this. It's sometimes hard for, say, a 45-year-old father to try to emulate his 16-year-old son. They just don't speak the same way no matter how hard they try. They don't say the same kinds of things. They don't have the same kind of actions on the keyboard. Maybe one is a hunt and pet guy, but one can just, fly away at the keys. All of those are little signatures that we can use in cases like this. And it's exactly the kind of thing that we did. Here's the other problem. Juveniles. That's what these guys were. They're juveniles. It's real hard to put juveniles in jail in the federal system. Damn difficult. But the fact of the matter is, that's where most of the problem comes from, is from juveniles. In this particular case, we had to work with the state authorities in California, and ultimately we handed the case off to the state authorities and let them prosecute underneath the state laws that they had out there. That's a kind of case where you've got someone from the outside breaking in. But is that the most common case? Might be real common, but it's not necessarily the most dangerous case. The most dangerous thing that we come across in the real world are the guys on the inside. It's that insider who comes down, sits down at the keyboard, he has the access to this system that he's sitting at, and goes to work and steals the crown jewels. Anybody here see the first Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise? Remember the one scene when he has to break into the CIA to get those files in there that were in the supercomputer? The question comes up sometimes is that when the FBI goes out and we talk about those insiders and the dangers that they pose. But yet they're not the ones that get all the hype. They don't get all the media. It's the outside. It's the hacker. It's the cracker who goes and he breaks in. He's got this great mind that breaks into something. When rarely is that the real problem. The real problem is the guy who sits down next to you. The reason that I think that happens is because sex sells. And that's why I bring up the Mission Impossible movie. Think of it this way. How many would have gone to see that movie, or how many would have thought that scene would have been exciting if instead of having Tom Cruise sinking slowly out of the ceiling, that drop of sweat, he's got to catch it so it doesn't trip the alarm. If instead of a scene like that, it was just, the bespectacled analyst who came in and sat down, put his coffee on the counter, and started typing. That would make for a real boring movie, wouldn't it? But who is more likely to be able to take the information out of that computer? Look what Tom Cruise had to do to get there, whether it was the fire department, whether it was climbing through the ceilings, sinking down out of them, catching the sweat, breaking it, the whole 9 yards. Likely, more likely than not, it's going to be that guy who came in, sat down at the computer, was given the passcode, knew how to get in, and knew what was there. He is the guy who, while might be the least likely on your initial radar screen, is the one who can really take you to the cleaners. So, that's what we tend to see. Wen-Ho Lee. People may not like us for what we did with Wen-Ho Lee out in Los Alamos. But the fact of the matter is, that's why it was of such concern. Because here's somebody who is given access, they know how to get around in this, and all they had to do was walk up to the computer, stick their floppy disk in, and download anything they wanted to. Walk out of the room, it's all done. I mean, think of how much information that you can throw on a floppy disk. I mean, at that time, maybe zip disks were in vogue. Now you can write stuff to CDs. How much information can you pack on to, a CD right now? You'd fill this room with paper easy. How hard is it to walk out of this room with a CD tucked in your pocket versus the room full of paper? That's the issue that you're finding. The other thing that we find a lot out in the real world is some kind of theft that goes on. A lot of the identity theft that happens, credit card theft, that's another big one. Let me explain that one just a little bit, why we're seeing what we're seeing. I'm going to write a typical transaction. Okay? Models. I love models. This is a model of a typical internet transaction. I don't care if it's an FTP transaction. I don't care if it's Telnet. I don't care if it's an email. I don't care if it's a website. It makes no difference. The concept is essentially the same. And here's what you have to look at. If you're the bad guy, let's take a look at the bad guy's perspective of the internet, if you will. How do they look at it? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What we have down here are the users. This is all you and me sitting at home. There's millions of us out here. Busted by the cell phone. I hate it when that happens. Hello, darling. Yes, I'll bring home the milk. There's millions of us out here. But what's on your computer? This is what my argument is going to be. You sitting here at home are probably the weakest link in this chain. Why? Because most of you aren't computer security experts. Because you don't have a whole lot to protect. There's always this cost-benefit analysis that is going on behind the scenes in your brain. From the bad guy's perspective, he can probably break into your system relatively easy because you probably have pretty poor security. But there's things that make him shy away from that. Two things in particular. Number one, how much can he get on your home computer? Anybody here does not have a home computer? Everybody has one. Any of you guys use things like Quicken, Microsoft Money, things like that? A lot of people do that. If you're not familiar with them, you can save your financial information on them, your credit card information, your checking account information, all that sort of stuff. Let's say then that a typical home user has, I don't know, what, 5 credit cards, let's say. You've got the information of 5 credit cards sitting here on your computer. And it's a pretty weak system from a security perspective. The bad guy can get into this computer, right? But what's he going to get out of it? If he breaks into it, he's going to get, what, a big whopping 5 computer cards, or credit card numbers. That's not much. The take isn't much. The cost-benefit balance doesn't really equate too well. And here's a second factor. How do most people log on to the internet from home? We're getting a whole lot of broadband coming up now, but really heretofore it's been dial-up, right? You have to dial, 1-800, I love AOL, whatever it might be. Understand how a computer works. I talked before about those IP addresses, the Internet Protocol addresses. There's 2 kinds. There's dynamic and there's static. Now, if you go to iupui.edu, that's a static IP address. That address is the same day in, day out, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Makes no difference. Always got the same IP address, doesn't change. But that is not the same thing when you dial up AOL at home. What happens when you dial up AOL, and I'm just using that as an example, is effectively what you hit is a phone bank. When you guys call your office at work, let's say, and you've got the main switchboard, is there really only one number, or is there rollover numbers? If the main line is busy, the phone rolls over to the other numbers, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 20th, the 30th. If you were to call FBI headquarters, 202-324-3000, do you think there's only one incoming line? Hell no. There's hundreds of lines. Same concept holds true with these modem banks. You call 1-800-I-LOVE-AOL, but behind that telephone number are rows and rows and rows of modems that you are logging onto. Each of those modems has an IP address which is temporarily loaned to you for the time while you are online. What does that mean? Effectively, to the bad guy, it means that you're a moving target. How long are you online for? Maybe you're doing some research, so you're online for 4 hours, let's say. That's a pretty long time for someone to be connected to a dial-up at home. So what you've got is you've got some bad guy out there who is trying to break into your weak home computer system to try to get those 5 credit card numbers, but he doesn't know what your IP address is, or at the very least, he doesn't know which one it is amongst the hundreds in that modem bank. So he's got a lot of work to do just to try to find out which IP address you are, factor in that short period of time relatively that you're online. He's got to be online, you got to be online, you got to have the right IP address. All of these ducks have to line up in a row for him to find your weak computer sitting at home with a big whopping 5 credit card numbers in there. From a cost-benefit perspective, does it make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It does happen. It can happen. But it just doesn't make a lot of logical sense. What's the next step? Routers. Information. When you go online, you go to, let's say, Amazon.com, and you want to order a book, what happens? You go online to Amazon, you pick up that credit card, that one of 5 credit cards that you've got, and you plug that into the web page, right? When you hit send, do you think it goes directly straight from you to Amazon? Doesn't. It goes through maybe, I'm not going to say hundreds of routers, but it'll go through a lot of routers. If you're ever to trace route yourself as you go from point A to point B, there's a point A sub 1, A sub 2, A sub 3. There's a whole lot of subs that you go through before you finally hit your end point. Those are all called routers. Now, can the bad guy attack this router to try to get that credit card information that you're sending? Yeah, he can do that. He can put sniffers on the router, he can compromise the router, he can do things so that he can kind of watch the traffic as it goes by. But again, let's look at the cost-benefit analysis. First of all, who runs this? Is it a bunch of yokels? More likely than not, it's computer people, right? It's guys that have a vested interest in computers, in the industry, and therefore in computer security. They are more likely than not going to have a greater level of computer security than this homeowner is. Does that make logical sense? Anybody disagree with that? As a general concept, that holds true. Here's the other part of this, is that when you send information from your computer, it doesn't necessarily go all in one contiguous stream. You've got, what, 16 digits in a typical credit card number? What happens is in order to maintain efficiency, the internet breaks your message up into what's called packets. Packet 1 might go through this router, packet 2 might go through this one, packet 3 through this one. They can go through all kinds of different routers. They take that path of least resistance at any given moment, and that moment is constantly changing. Time continues to flow on the internet. Consequently, if someone is able to sniff into this router and get maybe 3 of the 10 packets necessary to get that whole message, will he get the whole credit card number? Maybe yes, maybe no. It depends on which packets he gets. Consequently, this becomes a less attractive target for that kind of information. Now, grant you, you've got millions of users out here. They're kind of hard. There's so many of them, it's hard to find one that's a victim. Here you're narrowing it down to, let's say, thousands of routers. So there's fewer people to choose from, fewer computers to choose from. So in some sense, it's easier, but in some senses, it's harder. Again, a cost-benefit analysis from the perspective of the bad guy. It doesn't make sense for him to go here. Not that he can't, not that they don't, not that we don't see it, but it's not the most logical choice. What's the most logical choice? Most logical one is sitting down here. When you send your credit card number, where does it end up? Right here. When I send mine, where does it end up? Right here. When 50,000 other people order from Amazon.com, where does it end up? Right there. How much movement is going on with those credit card numbers once it's sitting at Amazon.com? Any? It's just sitting here saying, baby, come get me. That's what's happening. And it's not just the 5 credit cards that you had. Now it's 50,000 credit cards. It's all of those people that are sending all that information into one place, to a stationary database that is more likely than not somehow attached to this network. Who's running this? It's like Nordstrom's. It's a lot of these brick and mortar places, right? They want to get out there and they want to have that presence out in the internet. Are they computer specialists? No, not likely. They might contract somebody out. And I'm not saying that it's an impossible target or it's a real easy target to hit. It's a little bit hard. There are so many known exploits out there for operating systems that they become a very likely target. And that's exactly what we see. One of the cases that we had, one of the first ones, was actually out of San Francisco. That's exactly what happened. The guy goes out and he gets something on the order of 50,000 credit cards. What do you do with 50,000 credit card numbers? Anybody here think you can go through that much of a shopping spree? That's a hell of a spree. What this guy decided to do is says, you know what? I got this problem. I can use maybe a dozen of these credit cards, but how about the rest of the 49,000 of them? You know what? Mafia. They're the ones. I can probably sell them to them, right? That's his brainchild. That's his idea. How do you get hold of Mafia? This is Yellow Pages 1-800 La Cosa Nostra? I don't know. However it was that this guy did it, he calls up 1-800 La Cosa Nostra. What he didn't know is that we had rerouted that number to 1-800 FBI Undercover. Oops. He didn't get the mob, he got us. Sure enough, that's exactly what he does. He ends up he decides he's going to sell these numbers to us. He burns them onto a CD, sticks them into a book, meets our undercover agent at the San Francisco airport, makes a handoff. He thinks he's going to get money. No, instead he gets handcuffs. And what was the book that he hid all these credit cards in? Mario Puzo's The Last Dawn. He really didn't think he was talking to the mob. True story. That's what we really see. That's what truly happens out there. That's what businesses are facing, is that kind of theft. That's one of the kinds of thefts that we see. Intellectual property, another huge one. Who are the people that are trying to bang us for our intellectual property? Our friends, by and large. You know, we've got a list of countries that are there, and one of them is kind of against us right now in the UN. You can figure out which one it might be. It starts with an F. They really like our intellectual property. We've got good intellectual property. The assets of this country are changing. At the very least, if not changing, they're opening up. It used to be that we made a lot of cars, we made a lot of hammers, we made a lot of toilet seat lids, or whatever else it was. We manufactured things very well. Well, we still do. But the other thing that we now manufacture are ideas. How do you store an idea? Right there, in the computer. That's how you do it. It's intellectual property. So that's a huge thing that people are coming after right now. Whether it's going to be the military information, that's out there. Whether it's intellectual property information, huge for the businesses. Now let me talk a little bit about the difference between hope I'm not screwing anything up here with your things. What's the difference between an internet crime, an online type crime, versus information warfare? Does anybody know what the difference is? When I go out and I do the speech to some, yeah, of course you know it all. This is one of the slides that I like to use. I call this a continuum. And what we have down here is we have we've got crimes and we've got responsibilities. At the high end, you've got information warfare. Down here on the low end, you might have a theft or maybe a virus. Let's use a virus. That's probably a good example as any. Can that be a computer crime, a type of crime? If somebody sends a virus out into the wild, takes your computer system down? Yeah, it can be. We've charged people with that. What's the difference in the look between this and this? Anybody know? Let me ask you a different question. What color uniform does an Iraqi electron wear? Anybody know? Even the military guy doesn't know. Neither do I. Nobody knows. We really don't know what information warfare looks like in real life. We can theorize about it, we can set up war games and play about it, but in reality, what does it look like? For all we know, we may have been invaded already. And we just don't know because we don't know what it looks like. If we don't know what it looks like, how do we know whose responsibility it is? Down here at the low end, maybe it's just going to be the system administrator. Or is it going to be at the high end, maybe Department of Defense? Is it the Army, the Navy, Air Force? Whose responsibility is it? Is it the FBI's? We tend to get a lot of these calls because we're that one that's kind of in the middle of this continuum here. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a simple crime. I don't know if it's information warfare. Nobody knows what that may be. What will it be like when we see it? I don't know. Again, maybe it's going on already. Another one of the theories that we talk about in this circle is in an information warfare type environment, the catastrophic environment, what would the warrior do? Would he want to cripple your system and thus make the vulnerability obvious and known? Or would he instead simply compromise your system and hope that you never see the fact that it got compromised? What is of greater value to that combatant? I don't know. Depends on the combatant. Depends on the battlefield. It's an all-new battlefield. Somebody comes marching across the border, he's got a funny-looking uniform on. I pretty much know how to handle this. We have a routine how to handle that kind of thing. But it's real difficult in this particular environment. Those are some of the things that we're looking at, just in a broad sense here in the computer realm. The forensics, that's another thing that is a developing area. That's a whole new, infant industry for law enforcement. It's been a long time that we've been taking fingerprints. We've been doing that for 100 years now, taking things of that nature, trying to figure out physical evidence. Does this piece of cloth that we found at the crime scene match up with the coat that the suspect was wearing? We can match those two pieces together. That kind of physical evidence has been around for several hundred years. What kind of evidence do you get off of a computer? How long does that evidence last on a computer? What's the lifespan of an electron? Hard to gauge. I come back to the same thing again. If I know that suspect is wearing a coat that has a piece of cloth missing off of it, I can tie the piece of cloth to a human being. How do I tie that electron to a human being? I can't put a computer in jail. I can put a person in jail. I can make sure he doesn't use a computer for a long time like Kevin Mitnick. But he's the one that had to go to jail, not his computer. That's generally the overall scene here. Let me open this up and let's see where this thing goes here on questions I've had on what we've talked about so far, or any other questions that you might have about the FBI in general. Please, somebody ask a question.
The prevalence of the broadband, internet access, in many cases static IP addresses of the home users. Have you seen a corresponding increase in attacks on home user computers?
Yes. There's been a corresponding increase in that. Here's one of the other problems that we tend to face. Who's going to investigate it? Every organization out there has limited resources, scarce resources. I'm sure you're studying that like crazy around here if you take any economics. Does it make sense for the FBI to focus all of its resources on your home computer when you lost those 5 credit card numbers? Doesn't make sense. Well, what about if you go to, say, Carmel PD? You live up in Carmel, you go to Fisher's, whatever it may be. Fisher's, by the way, is one of the best ones around here for a small department. They've got a good forensics shop. Maybe they know how to do it. Maybe they don't know how to do it. Another issue that comes up. Anybody here remember Johnny Cochran? Hate that man. One of the things that comes up is how do you handle the evidence? That was a huge issue back in OJ days, right? Johnny Cochran made those cops look like morons. That was with physical evidence. That's with the kind of evidence that we know how to handle. What do you think is going to happen with this electronic kind of evidence when we try to take that into court and try to explain electrons to 12 idiots sitting there in the jury box? That becomes real difficult when you have somebody like Johnny Cochran who is trying to do nothing but confuse the issue. One of the things I tell some of the other crowds that I talk about is that if you find that your company has been a victim, or at least you suspect you've been a victim, one of the first things that you need to do is you need to synchronize the clocks on all your computers. And the question always arises, synchronize the clocks, what difference does that make? You know, it doesn't affect how I got broken into or not. Well, you're right, it really doesn't. But what it does do, if they break into one computer, they're probably going to go to 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're going to hit them all. And once I finally do get all the evidence, I put it all together, I want to make sure that the times are right. Because if the times are not right, Johnny Cochran's going to make me look like a buffoon trying to have to explain the concept of the fact that the clocks may or they may not synchronize on there, and I don't know what the guys, he could change his time on his, and so all the logs may not mesh up. It doesn't matter. In a practical sense, does it matter that the clock's times are different? No. Realistically, it doesn't make a bit of difference. But is it just one of those little kinds of things that an attorney can use to cloud the issue? Oh, you bet. Do you think the defense attorneys are beneath clouding the issue? Anybody think that? I have a bridge for you. That's the case. So yes, you do see it, and on the flip side, there are better and better tools that are cost-effective for the home user to utilize. You can go down to CompUSA, pay $29.95, and have your pick of 3 to 5 different applications out there for personal firewalls. Are they great for industrial use? No. But they do a pretty good job for your home use? Yeah. Because the concept is this, in the physical world, you have a burglar. He goes down the neighborhood from door to door. Which house is he going to pick on? The one that has bars on the window or the one that doesn't have bars on the window? Let's go to the one without the bars, folks. That's easier to break into, right? It's a whole lot simpler. While I'm talking about this, let me get my soapbox about something else. One of the most common things that we hear from hackers in self-defense of what it is that they're doing is they like to come out and say, you know what? You owe us a debt of gratitude because we showed you what the vulnerabilities were in your systems. Without us, damn it, you would have an open system and people would be able to break in. I want to know if there's any parents here who think that you ought to encourage your kids to break into your neighbor's house because he doesn't have bars on his windows and doors. Anybody think that? Good. I'm glad. But it's the same concept, really, isn't it? Is it okay to break into your neighbor's computer? You didn't take anything. All you did was read his diary. Is that okay? Is it okay? Do you mind if somebody breaks into your house, goes into your bedroom and opens up the diary and takes a little perusal? Anybody here feel violated? Well, you bet you feel violated. He doesn't have to take a bloody thing. Same thing on the computer. It's exactly the same concept. But historically, we haven't taught ethics in the internet. Historically, what the mindset has been is, and the whole concept behind the internet originally, was a free sharing of information. And universities were the first ones to start it. I mean, DOD, but it was university backing behind it. Whole idea was so that the professor in California could share information readily with the professor up in Connecticut. That was the whole idea. I want to make sure that everything is open and free and available. And that was the mindset. Now, when you have a limited number of people that you're working with, that mindset is fine. If you have a trusted party, that concept is fine. But once you start opening it up to the whole public, that concept becomes less fine. Once you have a society of integrated parts, that is no longer a valid model. But that's one of the things I guarantee you're going to hear. Yeah?
In a more traditional physical crime, you would get a warrant and then go in and search a physical structure. What kind of struggles have you encountered with working with the internet and technology?
It's gotten a little bit easier, and there's some tools that have been developed to help us. One of the biggest problems that occurs is, let's assume that I can figure out where this attack came from. If you have a break-in the physical world, where does the person have to be before he breaks into your house? Standing outside your house. Is there a difference in jurisdiction between the outside of your house and the inside of your house? It's still in Indiana, it's still in Marion County, it's still in Indianapolis, whatever that jurisdiction may be, right? So if I want to get the warrant for that person, let's say he's got the computer sitting outside your door and he's breaking into your computer inside, I only have to go to one jurisdiction, really, Marion County, let's say, or Indianapolis. That's probably the smallest jurisdictional location I could go to get a legal process. But that's not how it really happens. When someone breaks into your house on a computer, what they are really doing is usually they will start here's them, bad guy, here's you, over here. Your computer, their computer. What they do is they go to computer one and break into that one. Then they go to computer 2, break into that one. Then they go to computer 3, break into that one. And then they go over to computer 4, break into that one. And finally they come back here and break into yours. When I come to your house and I try to figure out who broke into your computer, who does it look like broke into it? Right there, right? Did he really do it? He's probably some unsuspecting schmuck sitting there who just left his door open. He doesn't know that he was utilized. But let's say I go to him and I say, can you help me? You have been victimized yourself. Someone has broken into your computer in order to break into somebody else's computer. He says, yeah, sure, come on in. Glad to help you. Great. We go and we start monitoring his computer. Oh, lo and behold, we find out it came from number 3. Have we found the bad guy yet? Nope. We ain't even close. But we go to number 3, and we say, hey, somebody's been breaking into your computer. We think that you've been victimized, and they're using you to try to help us get to the next place. Can you help us? Sure, come on in. We'll be glad to help you. So we go. We monitor his computer. We start to get the logs, find out. Oh, what do you know? It comes from computer number 2. He's who's really at large here. Try to find out where computer 2 is. It's in Russia. Now what do I do? Walk over to his house? No, excuse me, Moscow, would you mind, let me in here so I can watch your computer? You think that's going to happen? No, not likely. That's on an international scale. You can have it on just a national scale. I've got to go to, let's say, Ohio, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Virginia, to finally get back to California. I might have to serve legal process in all of those different places. I got to go to 1, 2, 3, 4, and really 5 judges to do what normally would take only 1 judge to do. If someone were sitting outside your house, breaking into your computer on the inside, I'd go to the 1 judge who was had jurisdiction over Indianapolis. Here I've got to go to the judge who has jurisdiction over Ohio, over whatever the other states I talked about. So there's a legal issue. There's legal hurdles that we have to go through. And that makes it much more difficult as well, too. Yeah. Too late.
Your example with the credit cards is easy to grasp because there's a profit incentive there.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're looking at people who compose viruses
Mm-hmm.
or launch a denial of service attack, what's the mindset there? Is it just so they can say they did it?
Ego. Ego is one of the big things here. When I said before there's like scalps that they have to hang out, that's kind of what they do. One of the things that you'll see is when they're bragging amongst the other crackers that they're engaged with, they'll try to have some kind of proof. They'll have some file that they took from this ultimate victim down here so that they can prove just how good they were to be able to break into the system. So that's what you see, and that's the kind of evidence that we use. Another one of the questions that comes up when you talk about the profit motive, that's a pretty clear one to see. What about prosecuting somebody when he doesn't take anything? He just breaks into your system. Or like you say, a denial of service. What's the economic loss of that? That's why God made cost accountants. You start them early and often to find out what is the true cost of not being able to provide a service. Does that matter? Is that a good cost? Yeah, that's a real viable cost, and that's one of the things that we recommend people do. Get the cost accountant started. One of the first cases that we had was out in California again. There's a book, it's Cuckoo's Egg, Cuckoo's Nest, I can never remember which one it was. Anybody remember? Anyway, what the situation was in that particular case is that there was a guy at, I think it was Berkeley, I'm not sure the school. He's a system administrator, and he realizes, you know what, I've got about 75 cents worth of process time, of cycle time, that I can't account for. And ultimately, he figures out somebody is stealing processing time from him. And processing time, most people probably don't know what I'm talking about, processing time, because most people look younger than I am in this class. But way back when people shared computers, they shared the resources when it was up and running. That was called a process time or cycle time. And that time that you used a computer, you could charge for that time. And when students like you would come to a school, you would get, say, an hour's worth of cycle time for your tuition if you'd pay $75 an hour for it thereafter, things like that. That's what he was trying to balance out here. It didn't make sense. His books didn't balance, and it drove him nuts. Ultimately, he was able to figure out that it was somebody coming in and using the computers when they shouldn't be using it. Ultimately, it came out to be the fact that it was an Eastern Bloc country that was using it for spy research. And what this guy did is he called up to the FBI and he says, you know, hey, I think somebody's broken into my computer. I've got a loss here. Bright young FBI agent says, well, what's your loss, sir? We'll be glad to help you. 75 cents. You've got to be kidding. Click. Big mistake. Big mistake on our part. Big learning curve on our part. Was it the 75 cents? 75 cents didn't matter at all. The fact of the matter is, like I say, it was an Eastern Bloc espionage operation against many of our computers and a lot of that freely shared information that I talked about earlier before. So there are varying levels of ways of determining value. You talk about the credit cards, that has a pretty obvious intrinsic value. It's whatever the credit limit is. But in an economic sense, there's a lot of ways of determining value. Sometimes the cost accountants can help you determine that value. Sometimes it's just, what's it mean to my heart? So who knows? It mean a lot of different things. Yeah.
How do you guys decide? I guess with a lot of the little stuff, like someone's stealing my credit card, I doubt you guys really care about that. I mean, what level of, how do you decide when you guys get involved as opposed to somebody else handles it, the credit card? Just
Great question.
writes it off?
Great question. One of the other problems that we had, particularly early on in here, like I say, you call me with a righteous complaint. Somebody's got my credit card, and I don't know how they got it, and they're running up $500 worth of charges on my card, let's say, before you were able to get them shut down. Is the FBI going to investigate it? Probably not. Not for that kind of loss. Typically, just so that you know, we have loss thresholds in Indiana. There's loss thresholds all around the country. For us now, we can't even open up a case unless the loss is $100,000 or greater. So is that going to help you with $500? Not one whit. Who can then? Well, we recognize that this problem existed. We also recognize the fact that maybe some of the state and locals, they might have resources, but do you know to go to them? Do you know that they can help you there? You might not. What we established is we established a website. It's called the Internet Fraud Complaint Center. It's actually housed in West Virginia. I'll give you the website here. Is you can tell I'm not a teacher. I can't write very well on these things. That's the website we established. What the concept behind this website is that you go online here and you say, I lost my credit card, my credit card's been stolen and $500 worth has been stolen. You go log on and say, I lost my credit card, somebody stole it and I've had $2,000 worth. You call in and say, I've had another $250 stolen. The guy in Butte, Montana calls in and he finds out that he's got $1,000 stolen. What we do at this place is we collate all that information. We take your victim information, your victim information, your victim information, the guy from Butte, the guy in Moscow, if he wants to log on and give us that information, we will collate all of that. And now what we've got is we've got the 500 plus the 2,000 plus the 250 plus the 1,000, and we start accumulating dollars where ultimately that dollar value starts to rise to a level where it's prosecutable for us, where it makes sense for us to devote resources to what is really your problem, but not just your problem. It can be hundreds of people's problems out there. So that's what we do. That's how we solve that problem, is by setting this thing up so that we can collect that information. Now what they do, once they start getting some information, they start to see that things are coming together and there's some kind of investigative lead that we can pursue. Sometimes in these things, there's just nothing that we can do. Without evidence, I've got nowhere to go. But once evidence starts to mount, something that I can actually do something with, they will put together a package, and what they'll do, they'll send me the package. And they'll say, okay, there's a guy in Indianapolis who's been victimized for $500. Here's the evidence that we have obtained so far, and you might have possible venue in this case. Now, they don't only send it to me, but they'll also send it to the state police. They'll send it to the city police. They might send it to the county police. all of the various different agencies that could have possible venue. Now, not only do they send it to me, but they also send it to the agencies that have where you live. Maybe you live in Ohio, maybe you live in Florida, wherever else it might be. So they start disseminating these packets out to a lot of, what they're doing is they're shopping for law enforcement ultimately, but with a prepackaged deal put together. So that's how we try to address that problem. Yes, sir.
What is your biggest fear being in the industry? Now, what you know now, I guess, what's your biggest, is it information warfare?
Interesting question. I'll tell you what I don't fear. It might be easier to answer. What I do not fear is somebody coming in, and one of the big scares that you hear is somebody's going to come down and shut down the power grid because all the stuff gets interconnected. That's not my fear. Power goes down all the time. Power went out around the city here because of the snow. Was that some kind of warfare? Not unless God, impended it on us. That kind of thing happens on a regular basis. There are backup systems in place in order to be able to handle that kind of thing. What about, say, the water? Somebody opens up the floodgates. Well, great. You take the crank and you crank it back down again. You lose 100,000 gallons, but it doesn't flood out the valley. Those kinds of real catastrophic things are not the things that really concern me. I don't think that they're likely. Again, because I look at it kind of from that cost-benefit analysis. Does it make sense for somebody to try to do that? No, it really doesn't. You'd have to have so much in-depth knowledge about so many different kinds of systems because one power company doesn't necessarily have the same operating system, utilize the same utilities, utilize the same anything that the county sitting right next to them uses. There's so many different kinds of things out there. It would be very difficult for somebody to execute that kind of a coordinated attack. I think that the greatest fear that I would have is really right now, probably one of them is, given the current time and place again, would be somebody out there who figures out how to put together the dirty bomb based upon the information that's out there on the internet. How hard is it for somebody to gather, say, medical waste product and radiological medical waste product? Pretty easy to get. I'd venture to guess you could probably wander around in a lab coat over at the hospital over here and be able to pick some of that stuff up. Wouldn't surprise me in the least. Those places are not designed to try to protect this radiological material. Could somebody do it? Yeah, sure could. Typically what you see in the news now is you see the idea of the bombs that are over there, particularly in Israel is a big one. Well, what do? They pack those bombs with ball bearings and nails, right? That kind of thing, shrapnel, so that goes out. Well, in a dirty bomb, that's what they're effectively doing. It's not like it's going to be this big nuclear device that's going to go off and take out, half of, New York City. That's not what's going to happen. What is likely going to happen if that does occur, it'll be a small bomb. The bomb itself won't kill that many people, but it does blast all this junk all over, this nuclear junk all over. And again, maybe it's going to be medical, maybe it's going to be industrial, who knows where that might come from. And the knowledge to be able to do that is readily available. You go out there on the internet, it's real easy to find information on how to build a bomb. Ain't hard. I haven't gone out and looked for it, but I got to believe that it's not that difficult to go out and find where to get nuclear waste. People can learn that. That's one of the sayings that I like about the internet is the wonderful thing about the internet is that, the one thing about the internet is that information is freely shared. One of the terrible things about the internet is that information is freely shared. That's my paraphrase of it, but it's that monogamous blade. It goes both ways. It can be a wonderful thing, but it can be a terrible thing all at the same time in the wrong hands. How do you regulate that? China's trying. I don't see where the U.S. would try to regulate what sites that our citizenry can go to. That concern me more than anything. Yes, sir.
You touched on international topic. Do you guys try to reach out in order to get some help from outside?
Absolutely. One of the things, one of the biggest places that we do, obviously, is with our allies. The G7 over in Europe, we have meetings with them on a regular basis. One of the things that we try to do is we try to normalize our laws. When I talked before about how I have to go to different judges, if it's, let's say, in the United States, most of our laws, doesn't matter what state I go to, are more or less the same, or I could at least use federal laws which are the same anywhere in the country. But if I go to some place like Finland, they may not have a law at all about hacking, cracking, call it what you will. Consequently, it's very difficult when I have traced back and find out that the guy came from Finland. Now what do? They don't have a law against it. Consequently, they won't help me. We've tried to work out treaties with a lot of our allies to have similar kind of laws to what we have, to try to normalize our laws so that we can help them and so that they can help us. Some places, this isn't going to happen. There are some countries that we will never be able to get that kind of an agreement with. It's just not going to happen. But it's not uncommon. For instance, the case the Solar Sunrise case I talked about. In that case, we actually sent agents from my unit over to Israel to help. We couldn't actually do the investigation, but we worked with the Mossad and with the Israeli authorities over there to actually investigate the case. Utilizing their laws, they helped us do that. We did the same thing in another case over in Russia. We went to Russia. The Russian authorities helped us to some extent, utilizing their laws. It doesn't always work, and it's a very difficult kind of thing to work with. You get a lot of attorney time in, a lot of attorneys get involved with it. But yeah, it can be done, but it is difficult to do.
Take one more and then go ahead and take a break.
Okay.
Can you speak to your relationship, your office, the Bureau, with local and state law enforcement?
Actually, it's very good. One of the things here, in fact, it's probably better than most any place I've been. And I think that if you were to ask, let's say, in fact, Jerry Barker's a great example. I was in a meeting with him, the IPD chief, a couple days ago. We were there with a lot of people meeting about what do we do in the event of attack, in the event of war, what if the threat level gets elevated, now we're going to orange, what happens goes to red. We were all talking about those issues. And what Jerry Barker's comment was is he had just come back from a meeting of a lot of chiefs of police from all around the country. And he came back raving. He says, you know what? We have it really good here because we get along so well with the other state and federal agencies that it's almost like, well, we do. We literally do work side by side in many cases. Before too long here, I'm going to be setting up a cyber crime task force that's going to involve the state, local, other federal agencies, so we do work very well together. They have strengths, they have weaknesses, I have strengths, I have weaknesses, so we try to put those all together. Obviously that clock's not right, huh?
No, it just stopped when you came in, so you have to wait for time.
I thought that time was just crawling by here.
It's actually 10 minutes to 7, so. Dan, thank you very much.
You're
I know
welcome.
we all got a lot out of it.